Buenos dias. Welcome to DR36. Find your sweet spot. Find your sweet spot. It's 5:33 on September 23rd. My daughter's birthday is tomorrow, so I better get that straight. So today's daily reading is called Find Your Sweet Spot. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different model today. I listen a lot to a guy named Jocko Willink and his podcast called Jocko Podcast. It's an extremely awesome podcast. He's a Navy SEAL. I read his book, Extreme Ownership, and I like what he's doing, so I kind of model it sometimes whenever I'm able to do that. And one of the things he does in his podcast, he covers a lot of books too in a different way. But yesterday, as I was running, I realized he basically read about 30 minutes of a book to us, and I was so intrigued. And I thought, holy cow, he just read to me, and I loved it. So instead of just pointing out these examples in the book, I'm going to read them to you. Hopefully you're going to get more from it, and then I'll extrapolate and bring it into my life and into your life. But the chapter starts out by saying, Thomas Jefferson, it's kind of like kindergarten. It's kind of like kindergarten all grown up. Let's pretend we're sitting around and the Spaniard's reading to you. Thomas Jefferson, born quiet, contemplative, and reserved, purportedly with a speech impediment, compared to the great orators of this time, Patrick Henry, John Wesley, Edmund Burke, he was a terrible public speaker. So it goes on to talk a little bit about how Thomas Jefferson had his heart set on politics. He knew he wanted to do it, but he was born with such a bad speech impediment, messed up that word, speech impediment, that he knew that wasn't his greatest asset. So what he did was he started writing, and he became one of the best writers of his generation and probably of all time. And then it says later down the page, it says, he chose the latter, channeling the energy into his writing, which others put into oratory instead. There he found his medium. He wrote one of the most important documents in history in a single draft. Jefferson wasn't a public speaker. That doesn't make him less of a man for acknowledging it and acting accordingly. That's the most powerful part and point of this chapter. That doesn't make him a man. That doesn't make him less of a man for acknowledging it and acting accordingly. Think on our own lives, the things that we experience, the things that we endure, the things that we fall short of, one way or another. There's this I don't know, misdiagnosis of failing. Let me equate it to you like this. I lost in the UFC. 3 fights in a row I lost in the UFC. That sucked. Absolutely terrible. I don't feel good about it. I never felt good about it. But there's a difference between quitting. Maybe I'll never fight again, but is that quitting? No, I don't think it is. Quitting to me would be giving up on that burning will, that burning desire to do my best in single thing I do and inspire other people to do the same. That to me would be quitting. Pivoting, transitioning, accepting that, you know what, my time in the UFC is, for all intents and purposes, done. So what can I do now? That doesn't make me less of a man. That doesn't make me a killer of dreams or a wimp for giving up. No, that makes me, as this chapter is saying, that keeps me real, and that keeps me true to me while pursuing something greater than myself. So it's not quitting, it's pivoting and transitioning. And then there's another line further down the page that says, I just can't give up. I want to fight. You know you're not the only one, me, you, everyone. You know you're not the only one who has to accept things you don't necessarily like, right? It's part of the human condition. I just can't give up. I want to fight. That, my friends, is why my podcast, why my talks, why my course is called A Fighter's Mindset. I can't give up. I won't give up. I will persist. I will get back up. I will believe in myself. All of these characteristics of a professional fighter, of the life I used to live, of the life that all these stars, Mike Tyson, UFC stars, you name it, that they live, it has that mentality. I just won't give up. I want to fight. A little bit further, it starts talking about the causes of our problems. And it says, when the cause of our problem lies outside of us, we are better for accepting it and moving on. Again, we're going back to that idea of accepting it and moving on. The Stoics, who I mentioned, this book is loosely based on The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. The Stoics, who again, I'm not a philosophy expert, but I've seen it referenced many times, talk about using adversity to your advantage. The Stoics have a beautiful name for this attitude of accepting and moving on. It's called the art of acquiescence, and this is where it gets specific. Let's be clear, that is not the same thing as giving up. This has nothing to do with action. Time is for the things that we are immune to action. It is far easier to talk of the way things should be. It takes toughness, humility, and will to accept them for what they actually are. It's easy to talk about how things should be. It takes toughness to talk and accept how things are. I'm done in the UFC. I hate it, right? If I could pick, yeah, I'd probably still be there. Actually, I honestly don't know anymore, but for a long time, I won it. But boom, that's the way it is. You have to accept it. You have to move forward. You got knocked down. You got knocked out. Get up and move forward. And this next line is great. It says, rarely do we consider how much worse things could have been. I'm doing a session at Penn State Harrisburg, and the basketball coach I connected with really well last year when I did a course at Penn State. I did a 6-week course. The content evolved into a fighter's mindset, and I connected really well with this coach. You know, he's a basketball coach. I'm a wrestler, I'm a fighter, but whatever. It's universal. And so he asked me, he said, hey, could we set something up where you work with my team? I want you to instill this fighter's mindset in my team. And he said, my vision for it is that it's physical training. It's training. You know, it's not just in the classroom. I want you to put these guys through the ringer physically, and I want you to put them through the ringer mentally. And so yesterday, and the way I'm putting them through the ringer mentally is by pushing their physical limits, designing the workouts. You know, there's a thing that I keep thinking that said, I train for life how I train for my fights, or you train for your life how I used to train for my fights. And so I'm pushing them and pushing them and pushing them until they can't go any further. That's building their, muscular endurance, cardio endurance, etc. But it's also building their mind. And these guys were, just killing it. And they were like, grunting, moaning, whatever, pushing their limits, screaming. And as they were doing it, I said, guys, look, you're in a gym. It's probably set to 71 degrees. It's not raining. You're not in mud. You're not in freezing water. After this, and I said, I come from wrestling. After this workout, normally, I would go to the cafeteria and not eat breakfast because I have to make weight. You can go to the caf. You can eat whatever you want. You can drink whatever you want. Some of you guys can go home. You can take a nap. You can go to bed. I said, it could be much worse than what you're dealing with right now. So it's that idea of rarely do we consider how much worse things could have been. And I want to throw this in there as well. I referenced my strength coach, Don Messing, who passed away prior to my Eric Silva fight. And this guy was, Kevin, thanks buddy. And this guy was, he was one of the best people I've ever met in my life. Aside from my dad, he was probably the biggest single male role model in my life. And I tell this story, I tell in my book, I told it on the podcast last week, but this whole book is dealing with perspective, how you view things, how you take on obstacles, and how you move forward, how you fight, basically, how you fight life, kick your butt. But I remember one time he was training me, and he was eating, and if you've heard this story before, process it again. He was eating a plain rice cake. No flavor, no nothing, a plain rice cake. And he was eating it, and I was sitting there, and we were talking, and he took a bite, and he was like, And he literally closed his eyes and made a sound. And I said, Don, and this gets back to the mindset, right? I said, Don, do you love that rice cake, or are you just telling yourself that you love that rice cake? And he, in between bites and moans, he looked at me and said, isn't that the same thing? And then he went back to eating this delicious rice cake. And it was such a simple, profound statement that I'll never forget, and I never have forgotten, I never will forget, and I'll pass on to whomever I speak to and I reach in my future. So it is what you tell yourself. So I hope you took a lot from this. Find your sweet spot. It's called find your sweet spot. Figure out what you're good at. You know, don't look at pivoting as quitting. As long as you maintain the core you, as long as you maintain, for me personally, as long as I'm maintaining my integrity, as long as I train all the time, as long as I read and learn all the time, as long as my family's important to me, as long as I try to inspire other people, those are the things that make me me. Not wrestling, not fighting, not speaking, not mentoring, not anything. It's that truly matters. So find your sweet spot, kick the crap out of today. Take care.